Welcome back to the third video of the green attack path local privilege escalation. In the last video we used the local privilege escalation using the set UID for the dash binary, and we were able to achieve root access. With that access we created a user account. So the next item I want to talk about is SSH authorized keys. Hopefully you've used this in the past and are using it in the previous attack paths, but I thought I'd introduce this technique here. So remember when I authenticated after creating the account, I used SSH to authenticate as Gary. And then I had to type in the password. And it authenticated. If I do ls-lha, I can see the directory I'm in. I'm currently in root. If I go in the home directory, I'll notice that there's no home directory for Gary, and that's because of how I created the account. So if I looked at the passwd file, it does show a home directory for Gary, but there's no folder created. So I'm going to change that. So I'm going to escalate using dash. Now I'm root. I'm going to make sure I'm in the home directory. I'm going to make a directory called Gary. I'm going to change the ownership to Gary for the Gary folder. And just verify what I've done. Looks correct. And there's a couple of files here. There's the bashrc file and the .pro file. I'm just going to copy the bashrc file from the PC Nerd over to Gary, and then I'm going to exit out and re-authenticate as Gary. I typed the password wrong. Alright, now when I do pwd, I'm in home Gary. So the next step, I want to create a .ssh folder for the Gary user, or I can say SSH keygen. And it's going to ask me to create a private key, and I'm just going to hit enter on this. It's going to ask me to create a passphrase for that key, and I'm just going to leave it blank. And you shouldn't leave it blank in a production system, but for this purpose I'm going to leave it blank. And then if I ls-lha, I have a .ssh folder. So I'm going to do cd into that directory, and I will notice I have my private key and then my public key. So down here on this side of the screen, I'm going to exit out of this reverse shell that I had. And on my Kali computer, I'm going to go into that SSH directory, and you can see that I have my private key and my public key. Well, I can use my public key and place it on this compromised web server so that I can automatically log in with the username and the key. So to do that, I need to add, so I'm going to cat my public key on Kali, and then I'm going to echo that public key into a file called authorized keys. And if I look at the file permissions, it's read, write, read, write, read. If I come down here, I notice the authorized keys is read, write. I do want to change the permissions on this file because sometimes it will not run if you do not set the permissions properly. So I'm going to change the permissions to 400. And now I see it set up correctly. I'm going to exit this, and now when I authenticate as Gary, instead of it prompting me for a password, it's actually going to read the key and allow me to connect. So I hit enter, and I'm automatically in. And if I had set a password on the key, it would have prompted me for the password on the key for me to be able to authenticate. Again here, it's just reviewing what we did. We used on Kali, if you have not run SSH keygen, you will need to. By default, SSH keygen uses the RSA algorithm with a key size of 3072 bits. I would encourage you to learn more about the parameters or the command line switches that can be used for SSH keygen through their man page to generate different keys. And that is all for this attack path and this technique. Have a good evening and see you later.